to our speakers to participate for today's session. On behalf of School of Liberal Education, Galgotias University, and JU John Monnet Project, it gives me immense pleasure to welcome you all to the 2 weeks certificate orientation program and FTP on Introduction to European Studies, Concepts, Trends, and Opportunities. To our meeting, I'm Dr. Manasi Sinha, Associate Professor from Refugee, Galgotias University. We are very happy to be joined by Professor Sheetal Sharma today. So we'll be introducing our ma'am in a while. Today is the 4th day of this week session. And beginning with the first session, we are very happy to have with us Dr. Paroma. Dr. Paroma is currently associated with the Department of Political Science, Galgotias University. She is associated as an assistant professor and she will be speaking on the European Union and refugee crisis. By way of introduction, Dr. Paroma holds a multidisciplinary academic background with a PhD in Political Science from Secretary of Political Studies, JU, which she successfully completed in 2015. Her PhD research was on land, customary law, and gender, and analysis of institutional changes in land rights in Myanmar. She has joined School of Liberal Education, Galgotias University, since 2022, July 1. Before joining Galgotias University, she has worked as an assistant professor in the Department of Political Science in Lady Sheetal College for Women, University of Delhi for 4 years, where she has worked in different capacity as a faculty, and also she has worked on various research projects with UNDP, IKEE Foundation, and Tara Akshar on issues of adult literacy, gender, skill development, and civil society governance. Before starting today's session, I would like to mention to all our participants that the session will be of 30 minutes. That will be followed up by 10 minutes of question and answer session, and it will be recorded and will be telecast on Facebook Live with you. We are looking forward to this very important lecture by Dr. Paroma, and without taking much time, I would request ma'am to please deliver her lecture. Over to you, ma'am. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming here. This is a pre-presentation and it will be followed by Dr. Sheetal Sharma ma'am's presentation, and she would talk about multiculturalism. I'm starting by focusing on European Union and refugee crisis. The PPT is not. Okay, so let me start off, and if the PPT can be set up, then you can understand. So the first image that I have put on the slide is that of India's partition. Now, usually when we think about our past, there are certain images that would stay for a very long time. And through those images, we either create a connection with our past or that stays. So even when we forget a theory or we may forget the story, but the image is very strong. So if I think of the refugee crisis, I would not immediately think about European Union and what is happening there. But the first image that would come to my mind would be that of India's past. But here I'm not going to talk about India's past and what happened to us. Of course, even that was very, very horrific. But if you look at these images, one thing that is common in any refugee crisis is you would find people moving from one part of the world to another part. They are displaced, suddenly they are homeless, and suddenly they are being told that you pack everything that you have and you have to leave this place. And leaving a place is mostly out of fear. So even we don't fear life, we don't think about life on a daily basis, but there is a perpetual thing that would stay in our mind that we are fearful of dying. Even if we don't say that we don't know, we are not thinking about that. So that kind of fear forces people to leave everything and all the possession that they have. So there's that horrifying thing, unfortunately, has stayed in the present world, considering what is going on in Ukraine, is no way very different. So you carry the pain. The definition of pain hasn't changed because we are all humans. We feel the same pain, and suddenly, if you become homeless, you would feel the same pain. So from 1940s, 50s to 2022, we are feeling the same thing. Nothing hasn't changed. So now we move on to the European Union issue. Can we move on to the next slide? The next slide is next. Not coming. Okay. The next slide was really colorful, but the pain is similar. It was showing the issue of Ukrainian crisis and how Ukrainians were moving to other countries, trying to take refuge and really safeguard themselves. Now, what I've done, because my training is not in international relations per se, but my training is in political theory. So what I'm going to do is I will introduce certain political theory concepts that would help all of you to understand the refugee problem, the issues of European Union crisis, and let's start off. So the first thing is that let us first talk about the idea of a citizen. And whoever attended my class on politics of religion, we have also discussed there that what do we understand by the concept of who is a citizen. So citizen is definitely someone who is not a subject, who would possess rights, would also have certain obligation towards the state, and would have certain duties. Now, this idea of citizenship is also closely a concept of nation state, right? Okay. It's also tied to the, can we move on to the next one? Okay, let me quickly now show you the structure of the presentation. We will be very precise. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about would be citizen, nation, and state. The second thing would be political community. Then I'm going to focus on idea of a cosmopolitan citizen. Then refugees, asylum seekers, and migrants, common European asylum system, cohesion action for refugees in Europe, response of EU member states to refugee crisis, and finally, I'm going to focus on something with which I would end, is the concept of public good, fair play, and political community. And why I'm bringing it here is it is not out of context, but it is also the reason why there will always be a conflict somewhere, not to justify the conflict in any way, the conflict between citizen and refugees based on the availability of limited resources. Okay, so moving on to the concept of citizen, nation, and state. So idea of citizenship is based on, again, here I'm only focusing on the liberal concept of citizenship. So the liberal concept of citizenship will focus on that idea that an individual who is considered to be a citizen would possess rights. There will be a doctrine of natural rights, right to life and right to liberty, and right to his or her happiness that has to be protected by the state. So state can't come in and suddenly take away your right to life. Again, criticisms are open, and it's not that it is absolutely, I'm again talking from a very theoretical normative perspective. So you can keep writing your criticisms, and that would be welcome during the question and answer session. Sense of belonging. So when you think of a country, when you think of a nation state, there is a moral and psychological investment that you have. So every time when you celebrate a certain national holiday or talk about any country's historical past, it is like linking your present to that past and making you feel that all the fellow citizens share something in common, right? Even when we are all strangers. So we will never get to meet someone staying in a very remote corner of the country, but the sense of belongingness will come with this idea that we belong to this geographical territory that we call as our country. The nation then we move on to the fact that when politically a geographical territory is recognized, that is when we call it a state. So many times there can be individuals living in a state, but psychologically they might say, we have still not been able to form a nation. So let's say with women, they would say that there are laws that are made by the state, but are all laws favoring us? So we want a different kind of nation. So all these debates will go on, but so that is the difference. So when you get the political construction is very clear in your mind, where there will be systems of government that would form a state. We move on to the next concept, that is political community. When I talk about political community, here we focus on the fourth point, that is constitutional patriots. This idea, now European Union is a post-national concept. Why? Because there are many countries, there are multiple nations, and then they are coming together. Now, what is getting questioned here is then what would be the sense of belonging? Because we are speaking in a different language, we have a different culture, and then you are saying you have to come together. Of course, the rationalist theory of economic interdependence would work here, that because of the rational need that, if you come together, it's a globalized world, economically it would benefit countries, but still there is another very interesting concept which says that in a post-national political identity, where you're looking beyond the ideas of nation, you may be bound by your political boundaries and you may have your political values, but at the same time, you will also adhere to the principles of European Union. I would not go much into it because if we have time, I will come back to this slide. Next one. Idea of a cosmopolitan citizenship. Okay. This is again a very theoretical concept, and you would see that it's an illusion. Sometimes you will say it's an illusion, it's not going to happen. But on other cases, somewhere you might see reflection of certain principles being applied, and those principles are akin to the idea of cosmopolitan citizenship. That is, how do you look at a human being? Every human being would possess certain rights and dignity. Usually, the hierarchy that is there in our mind will somewhere place one human being above the other. So whenever we place a lot of importance to identity politics or identities, right? That, okay, based on certain economic standards, this person would come above you, or maybe the caste structure that we have in India, it will say that even if things change, you will remain a part of the similar caste. Now, when we think of a citizen, then, of course, US, if you become a citizen of US, you would have far more visa entry into a country would become easier. Having access to a lot of things might become easier. Now, here we are not talking about that. We have to think from this perspective that we are not bound by our political territorial identity. But can we just look at another human being as a human being who are just a fellow being with similar moral grounding, in the sense that if we are morally looking at another human being, we would not take away that person's rights. So there was a Greek philosopher by the name of Diogenes. He said, I am the citizen of the world. I don't define myself to be a citizen of this particular country. I'm citizen of the world. Martha Nussbaum, another very famous philosopher, she also reiterated the same fact, saying that I consider myself the citizen of the world. Now, Kant is a philosopher who said that let there be, this idea of world citizenship, whereby we affirm the existence of an universal community of humankind alongside the system of states. So let there be states, let there be boundaries, but at the same time, we focus on the concept of humanity. So how do we look at another person through the lens of humanity. When you look at another person through the lens of humanity, what you will do, you will say, okay, if there are refugees, if there are people with whom we do not share culture, with whom we do not share language, they are very different. We can also see that they might become a burden on the ground of humanity. We need to focus on accommodating people who are coming from a completely different terrain, and they came because there was a compulsion that was created by world politics. So even when, interestingly, EU countries, and I will share some of the criticism of certain EU countries, they are saying that we can't accommodate refugees any longer. Interestingly, started with colonialism, and then there are different kind of invasions that were done with the rich and powerful countries, and because of those actions, they are creating refugees. And so it is really not justified when they close their doors to refugees and say, no, this much we can do, not further. Now, focus under cosmopolitan citizenship is given on accommodation of differences based on universal standards. So yesterday during the lecture, when we focus on human rights, so we are focusing on universal standards. That standard has to be followed by every country, right? Standard of how you're treating another human being. So cosmopolitanism will focus on universalism. It will focus on the concept of humanity. And from here, then, we can also link this to the concept of global justice. How you are treating another through the lens of fairness. So if somebody is homeless, if someone is going through a country is going through abject poverty, let's say whatever happened in Sri Lanka. Now, if India says, no, we are not going to, we have our own issues, our problems, we will not get into the issues of Sri Lanka. You may choose not to, but again, if you look at it from that perspective of global justice, it is our responsibility to ensure that people shouldn't die of hunger, homelessness, or abject poverty. Rawls, another very important thinker, had written this book known as Laws of the People, and there he again starts with a liberal thinker thinking about a very rational understanding of how human beings should be. And the liberal idea usually would look at the human beings from a very atomized perspective, that I, me, myself, things that should interest me. But then from there you move beyond, you are looking at individual human beings from the perspective of everybody possessing equal moral worth. Now, so over here, it's very huge. I will not go into the ideas of cosmopolitanism. I will just wrap it up. Coming over to the definition of refugees now. And I'm next. So there was a convention relating to the status of refugees, 1951, which says, now you can connect with all the points that I discussed, that any person who, owing to well-founded fear of being prosecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group or political opinion, you have seen that if you possess a very different political opinion, you might be forced to leave the country of your birth. He is outside the country of his nationality and is unable, or owing to such fear, is unwilling to avail himself of the protection of that country. So suddenly, from being a citizen of a country, you can also become the refugee in another country, because the protection that your country was supposed to give you, your country is not giving you, right? It can also happen this way. It is not always that someone else is coming and invading your country. A social group can get ostracized suddenly, and you might be forced, that group might be forced to leave a country. So protection of that country, or who not having a nationality and being outside the country of his former habitual residence as a result of such events is unable, or owing to such fear is unable to return. So difference between a migrant and a refugee, migrant and a refugee, you can go back. With a refugee, the problem is, and that, for example, let's say in countries like Syria, Afghanistan, it's difficult to go back. You have a home. Then what you have, connected with the point that I made, You have a nation in your mind, a cultural belongingness, not with the place where you have come. Your host country has welcomed you, but still you are in search of a state because the place where you are staying might give you all the protection, but the nation is somewhere in your imagination. So these 3 points, I have taken it from the European Commission website. You can go and you can also search it. So just to give you a distinction, refugees, they are recognized by host country. So there are certain laws and certain rules that would be laid out, and they would say, okay, on the fears of, I just narrated those, on those grounds, they would be given the status. But not everybody would be given the status. The next point would be asylum seekers. Many a times we would say that, let's say in a non-democratic country, whenever there is a shift or change in the political leadership, opposition leaders, somewhere they have to run away into another country and they have to seek asylum. They have to seek asylum. So asylum seekers will not be refugees because they do not qualify all the rules that have been laid out by that country or by, let's say, EU in this context, that says that on these grounds you can be termed as a refugee. Migrants, the third point, are those where people choose to move to another country. It is more voluntary. In case of refugee, it is forced. In case of migrants, it is more voluntary. Now, here, many a times, when you try to undermine any crisis, you use the word migration. People just migrated. No, sometimes people do not migrate. It's people are forced to leave. The next slide. So what has been done? It's from the latest. So they have created a fund. They have decided that let's create a fund, which is known as Asylum, Migration and Integration Fund, which was started in 2021. And this fund is from the year 2021 to 2027, which has been set up, and they have already invested euro 9.9 billion. And here they are trying to capacitate different countries of the European Union. Now here, this is again a very important issue. Countries would say we are open, we are very, very moralistic, we understand the need of humanity, but we don't have money, right? That is the time when you need organizations like EU to support those countries and to live up to the higher cause of protecting the interest of refugees. Recently, another thing that has happened with the rise of the Ukrainian refugees, they have come up with coalitions action for refugees in Europe. This is also this is a group that they have created to support member states for providing emergency assistance. This is something very, not, I won't use the word interesting, but something that has been done with a lot of rational thinking, that suddenly you might find that because of some turmoil, emergency can lead to protecting the interest of refugees. What are the 3 things that they are going to do? Temporary accommodation, food and water supply, and medical care. The next slide. So this is how they have said, we care, coalitions action for refugee in Europe. The last, almost towards the end. Problem of integration. Any country, whether it's India or any other country, there will be this perpetual problem of integrating people. Coexistence, everybody is different. Someone based on, let's say, a certain position already given in a certain country would think that we are superior. So whites would think we are superior than black, or in a caste structure, those higher would think we are superior. So this superiority can create problems in any country. But the problem increases when you have to accommodate people who are not your citizens. So there is another kind of violence that can be leveled against them. So even when funds are created, even when support is given by EU, this statement was given yesterday, August 25th, 2022, by Sweden's PM, Magdalena Andersson, and she says that I am fearful that there would be creation of a country within country like Somali town and Chinatown. So these are the things that, so if the fear is, if we go back to the idea of nation, citizenship, and state, the state is all trying to present to you an idea or imagination of history. So everyone should conform to that idea of history. When people, they are bringing in their own history, the fear is that what will happen to the national culture? Right? It is out of that here she openly said this. Media, on the other hand, said that the problem is not with whether Somali town or Chinatown is getting created or not. The problem is whether the policies of the government would be framed in such a manner where they do not encourage ghettoization. So when you allow people to live in ghettos and you do not bring in policy to pull them out, that is the problem. It is not the other way around. So another thing is that there has to be a change in the way we look at people. Yes, refugees have come in, but their next generation who are born in the country by virtue of birth can't be treated as refugees and can't be discriminated against. So that's the idea. So you have to give them possibility for social advancement. I think next one. Oh no, this one. So this is the last point with which I want to end. No, no, there is another point, but this is just the last issue on EU. Afghan refugee crisis. Now, we know what happened. We have seen it was televised. It was horrific. People were running behind aeroplanes. They were not getting, the opportunity to just board those planes. And they were put in a situation that you either survive, who will take care of you, nobody knows. Taliban came and there was a takeover of Afghanistan. But in all of that, EU countries continue to show those fears. Some of the things that you can already read that is there on the slide, even Angela Merkel was a former German counselor. She said that if there is a problem in Afghanistan, it should not be solved by EU, it should be solved by countries that are close to Afghanistan, right? Not realizing that, of course, EU is better off than the countries that are surrounding Afghanistan, but just moving away from the crisis. Poland also, what Poland did, had built 150-kilometer wire fence so that it doesn't allow, so that refugees can't find ways to enter those countries, even illegally. Of course, illegal migration is not something that I'm supporting, but I'm just saying that on one hand, we are talking about higher values, and on the other hand, there is reinforcement of all those ideas and thoughts that create boundaries and create divisions. The last point, which is little unrelated, but I still would want to kind of listen. So basically, governments would say our problem is how do we provide resources? So when you have to provide certain resources to citizens which are non-excluding, everybody, so healthcare, education, all those aspects they are to be taken care by the state. And somewhere this is a very interesting, we may not like the state, but there is a transactional relationship with the state whereby the state demands the obligation by providing all those public goods. Now, what would happen is that the in case of citizens, because they are going to bring a certain political power back, let's say in a democratic country, their responsibility towards refugees would always be secondary compared to what they need to do for their citizens. Another point, the last point is that because there would be resources are not available in abundance, they would always say that we are not able to manage resources in such manner where we can allow refugees to come. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Paroma, for that wonderful lecture. And thank you for providing us key insights and highlights of various issues of the European Union and refugees, taking us through the critical perspective and the critical perspective of that. So we will pick up questions after our main session. So I'm now moving on to our most awaited session to be delivered by Dr. Sheetal Sharma. I've been waiting for you since now. So I would like to introduce Dr. Sheetal Sharma to you. Now,
आपको स्क्रीन एडजस्ट करना है यहाँ से
Dr.
So you have
Sheetal
to,
Sharma is associated with the Center for European Studies. Before joining JNU, she was a lecturer at the Institute of Technology and Management, Gurgaon, India. She taught the emergence of sociological theory in Europe and methodologies in social sciences and the curriculum of the PhD program of the London School of Economics and Political Science. She has been involved in developing video lecture series in Sociology for CRET, NCRT's projects, National Repository for Educational Resources and Training. She has also been invited as a discussant on a number of programs of radio and TV. At the Center for European Studies, JNU, she offers MPhil and PhD
स्क्रीन का proportion हम देखना है either you want to highlight this one or that one जो पीछे
the focus of the sociological understanding of nature, structure,
it's
and
okay.
dynamics
How to
of
play so that
social
if you want to read out so yeah.
And thank you so much for joining us today. Just to inform you, that Sheetal Sharma has been a key figure in our 2 weeks certificate orientation program. Because she is the reason that we are here. We are able to conduct this program. She is a collaborator from Jawaharlal University and through her own project, the Monnet project. We have been able to carry out this work. Thank you so much and for giving your support to us. I would request you to please now take over the session and provide us with the information. Thank you. Good morning to all of you. Am I audible? All right. I'm so happy to talk to all of you as connected to Manasi. Dr. Manasi is my student. She has submitted her PhD as my supervision. And I'll be standing here in the middle of the group and then I don't want myself to hide behind something and then speak. I am not bothered about is it getting live or not, but I really want to talk. How many of you are from undergraduation? I think it seems to be a very young group. So it's easy to talk to you. And you're doing social sciences? How many of you have actually done social science at class 11? Only a few of you. So rest are from science and commerce background. All right, thank you so much. Now I want to speak to you on European studies. Backbencher, I'm going to talk to you about European studies. What is European studies? And in this 2-week lecture series, we are going to cover a lot many subjects which are pertaining to Europe. We are going to talk to you about economy of Europe, culture, society, politics, anything that pertains to Europe in a short crash course. I'm going to offer something to you which is a combination of cultural, social, and political aspects. Okay, which includes something which was covered very wonderfully by Paroma, about migration and refugee. And then beyond migration and refugee, now what? How do we look at the issue of this refugee crisis, or even migrants in Europe, and even a stage further up about the diaspora in Europe? And all these concepts that we use, refugee, migrant, or diaspora, we are talking about somebody who is culturally other than you. Okay. Why? Because in the European context, primarily they are known by our color of skin, Christianity, primarily Christian in nature, and the ethnicity, the language that was speaking. And the people who are classified into these 3 categories, either as a refugee or a migrant or a diaspora community, they belong to a community which is of others. So how do they look at these others? How do they relate to these others? These are some of the issues and challenges that are very pressing and they need to be addressed. And how far is your addressing those questions? Successfully collaborating. These are the issues, these are the challenges, these are the ideas that need to be put under lens. Microscope and science में पढ़ा है कि क्या ये सही कर रहा है? What are the drawbacks? How far they are not failing to achieve the goal that they want. Now, before I come on to these things, I want to give you the history of Europe.
Europe जो आज दिखता है कि Europe आया किससे? What is the journey behind that we see in Europe? There are many books, all the readings that were in social science and political science and history and everything. Most of these readings are most of these readings are primarily Eurocentric in nature. What is Eurocentrism? That they perceive themselves from the dominant text, that we are the people we know, we can dictate to how to manage things. And we are the people who candidate for development. And that is why there is stand there. No, you have to you can sit here. I think stand here and speak. Okay. Sound problem. I'm not close to my audience, so I feel disassociated. I need to stand in the middle. No, that's fine. Now they're settled. It will create much of commotion. I don't want to waste even 2 minutes. Okay. Now, when we say that, what is their journey? How did they come to this stage in which they are called as modern Europeans? Okay. Most of their writings that we see or read in social sciences are primarily Eurocentric in nature. They tend to place themselves at a level and then let the world know that this is how you have to manage your domestic affairs, this is how you have to design your modern political institution, education system, and all. India as an example. We follow their political, economic, educational models, legal system, everything. Now, there's no harm in following it. Absolutely no. But वो भी तो कि ये stage पे कहीं ना कहीं से आया. It's not something that one fine day they got up. In fact, your story is very interesting. When we look at Europe until 16th century, 15वीं 16वीं शताब्दी तक जब हम यूरोप को देखते हैं, they were reading under the Dark Ages. Some of you might have read history in class 12 and earlier that. The Dark Ages of European societies were really Dark Ages, in the sense that much did not change other than just the process of survival. And why survival? Because Europe is climatically not very good. It's very hostile climate. For 6 months you are cold. And then a large number of wars were happening between European regions and nations, or whatever you may call it, existing at that point of time. 6 years of war, 8 years of war, 10 years of war, 30 years of war, 100 years of war. Almost all 1 to 100 numericals are exhausted in terms of wars. So these wars were between religious communities, these wars were for resources, these wars were for various reasons. And thus, for 6 months, the condition is frigid, you can't produce much, resources are limited. And can you guess what was the life expectancy during 15th century or 16th century in Europe? Any wild guess? Life expectancy? 60, 40, 35, 30, 25 to 27. That was life expectancy some centuries back. And 3 generations were rare in Europe. 3 generations were rare. They had not seen what is an extended family. Although, of course, they do not know it now. So, but then at that point of time, 3 generations were rare in a family. And even a small scratch, you're walking in the road, even a small scratch would be fatal. And they were fearful of crowds because crowd was unknown, crowd was unseen. Things were like they were scared of the limited resources. And on top of it, if you have done history, and this is very interesting, when the enemy armies passed by, the armies जा रही हैं एक state की दूसरी state से युद्ध करने जाती हैं, when they pass by, then what happens? They tend to loot, burn everything that comes in there. And the modern state system, the police system, the army system was not as evolved as this is now in Europe. But somehow there was so much of fear, so much of fear. In sum, the Indian civilization and Cynic, that is the Chinese civilization, were far better than what we see in Europe at that point of time. Suddenly, some people start thinking otherwise. There is a philosophical revolution which leads to social revolution, political revolution, economic revolution, and all sorts of revolutions that you can imagine. Now, what happens at this point of time? They start questioning what is taken for granted. And this is an era which I would say beyond Renaissance 12th, 13th century if you go down there. This is something which is called as an era of enlightenment. And enlightenment starts questioning everything. See, why I'm believing in something which I'm told to believe in. Suppose she belongs to church and she says, okay, this is this. For a minor example, in sociology, we tend to study three stages of human knowledge past, three stages of evolution. So from theological thinking, that is everything attributed to God, they move on to metaphysics, and from metaphysics, they say it's all scientific invention. So if 100 people die, they are not dying because of God's theory. This is what church used to tell them for a long period of time. But one puts me in 300 points and you'll be happy. And then you'll stop there. But no. He said, this is because you are drinking this contaminated water. You stop drinking this. You will let us forget. So, to know is to predict, and to predict is to control. This is what the founding father of sociology Oxford talks about. He says that their perspective changed, and then everything became scientific. The ball of scientific understanding, investigation, experiment was kept rolling, and it did not stop. And one after another, they started using scientific radical paradigms to prove things. How I know that this is hot? Because I've experimented and done this. So they said, we are not going to believe in anything that is not empirical, that is not seen. We will believe in something that we can experience art. Hence, experimentation, science, rationality, everything came into their worldview. And they started challenging everything. And when this challenging started, Manasi, brick by brick, the Catholic Church that had authority over them that was guiding their worldview, it got this kind of thing. The church authority, and scientists became the new authority in society, those who had knowledge, those who were speaking on the basis of facts, on experimentation. And this is how they usher in modernity. Modernity is something which is public, something which is present, up to date. It's something which is not discrete, something which is not redundant, something which is not based on superstition or dogma, or something which is not valid, something which is updated, something which is valid, something which is reliable, which is of this time, present contemporary times, and I can see it. So modernity and the world will change. Okay, so thinking will change. Now, once my thinking changes, my everything will change. So my society started changing, my politics started changing, my economy started changing. And one major change was that religion cut out. So another institution, monarchy, that was resting upon religious legitimacy, it also crumbled. Or French Revolution was later after this monarch they said nothing to him. He is no longer representative of God sitting on earth. He can choose argument. So every science starts with three questions. What, why, how, who. So politics में भी ये याद रखना कौन रूल करेगा कब तक रूल करेगा कैसे रूल करेगा और क्यों रूल करेगा अब monarch क्यों करवा था वो तो सब अपनी fancy से कर रहा था because he was king, he was descendant, he was whims and fancy and everything, he had nothing doing. अब हम सब change करेंगे system. Who will rule? We will choose. Why will he rule? Because we have chosen him. We have given him authority. How will he rule? On the basis of a book called as Constitution. For how long will you rule? Years, 4, 5, 6, as many as you define by democracy. And how will you come into the process of democracy? So all those what, why, how, whom, in fact, everything now that to engage in democracy. So what happened? It's one of the important visible consequences was that every individual in society got single vote. So something which was for a long period of time held by a community, society, a group of people, aristocrats, or the handlers of the society, the power was descended to every individual grassroots level and farmers. And this transformed the character. And this brought something which are called as the fundamentals of life. LIF. Liberty, I, individualism, F, freedom, and E, equality. I repeat, it brought life to everybody. Liberty, individualism, freedom, and equality. And this is what is the beautiful template that we offer to the world. We talk about modern democracies present, we talk about democracies present all over the world in one form or the other. We talk about Indian society, panchayat, this, all forms of systems are existing. But the modern form of democracy is something which we see is coming from the modern education system. It's not that they are good. We are not valuing them right now, that are they good or bad in their content. But right now we are seeing that whatever template that we are following is something that has been given to us by the government question. Individual life in the fundamentals values established forward. So then they started getting reflected in all the aspects of life. No gender inequality, no inequality on the basis of caste, class, religion, ethnicity. Everybody was equal, and we know we tend to appreciate the way the modern world gives you freedom, gives you fly, cherish your dreams, and all these things. We talk about the Western world when we look at it. Now, the story begins. Decolonization ho gaya. Then there was a fight between these countries, devastating 2 world wars. The first one very bitter. The second one, in which further Holocaust and all these things that we read in history, we come to a stage where Europeans realize, they have to come together. And then we start forming a union. Union बहुत देर में आया, 91 में आया, when Treaty Passage Treaty. But the seeds of this union, एकजुटता, संघ जिसको कहते हैं हम यूरोपियन संघ हिंदी, यूरोपियन संघ की seeds जो थी वो Second World War के बाद उन्होंने डाला. First 6 countries come together, then keep on joining, and with the fall of Berlin Wall, we tend to see European Union formally coming into existence up until the state that now there are 28, then -1, 27 countries in the European Union currently. Now, what is the soul of this European Union? The soul of the European Union is all these values that we have established over the centuries, 14 centuries, which was freedom of movement, respect for law, human rights, freedom, equality, liberty. What happened? The continents and the countries which were fighting with each other so bitterly, cutthroat. Two of the worst failures were France and Germany during the Second World War. They all shared all their animosity with one another. And we joined hands together, and somebody jokes that they wanted to embrace each other so hard that the other hand got them to backstab him. So they joined each other so closely. अब हम जो है हम लड़ेंगे और लड़ने के लिए क्या होगा scarcity of resources होंगे या borders होते हैं उन्होंने सब कुछ पूल कर दिया. They became borderless, and they said we will pool our steel and all other resources together so that they don't fight over it. So this was the best ideal solution that they could have in order to avoid the third world. Very good. Union comes into existence, and from there the journey begins of expansion. Now let me fast forward and bring you to 2010. 2010, and particularly after fall of Berlin Wall and even liberalization, दो era history में बहुत important है. एक तो 50s था when the third world got independence. Okay, one was that era, and the second era is 1990s. जहाँ पे particularly the third world once again is changing its form. हमारा model change हो गया, जो LPG model आया, तो वो हमारा दूसरा एक जन्म होता है. From where we start getting, getting mainstream with the world, because so far we were like closed economies, socialist or mixed models. But from 1990s, we opened our wings and we said, okay, modern capitalist systems are good, so we are going to embrace them. So from 1990s, and particularly when the world starts changing, 10 साल में एक और इवेंट होता है हिस्ट्री में फिर जो रेवोल्यूशनाइज कर देता है. वो क्या है? ट्विन टावर 9/11 ट्विन टावर की बॉम्बिंग हो जाती है और वहां से फिर से एक टर्न आता है इसकी, ठीक है। अब टर्न्स को हम कैसे समझ सकते हैं, हम तो स्कॉलर्स हैं, हम ज्योग्राफिशियंस हैं, हम थोड़ा सा लेंस से देखते हैं। पहले जो एरा थी वो इट वाज ऑल अबाउट कैप्चरिंग द टेरिटरीज, ठीक है, कोलोनाइजेशन। सेकेंड वर्ल्ड वॉर क्या थी, ऑल अबाउट पॉलिटिक्स, कि वहां पे मेरी टेरिटरी है, वहां से वहां की है, so we were primarily into political issues. After the end of this, there was an ideological war that divided the world into two groups. तो यहाँ पे क्या हो गई, बहुत इकोनॉमिक वॉर बन गई, the west versus the west, east part of the world, यहाँ से इकोनॉमिक वॉर। जब इकोनॉमिक इश्यूज खत्म हुए 90s में, तो कल्चरल इश्यूज 10 साल बाद शुरू हो गए, वहाँ पे कम्युनिटीज और रिलीजन और वॉर जो थी वो आइडेंटिटी पे आगे बढ़ी। और यहाँ पे क्या हुआ कि इट गेट्स एन इंटरेस्टिंग ट्विस्ट। The world of the countries, the third world countries, they enter into a different kind of conflict. And conflict forces people to leave. We was studying very interestingly what are the fears that make you leave a country. World over currently, आज की तारीख में, every single minute, 50 people are getting displaced while I'm talking to you. अगले 50 सेकंड में, अगले 1 मिनट में 50 लोग डिस्प्लेस हो जाएंगे for various reasons. This can be natural, this can be political, this can be social, ethnic, whatever. There is the current population of people who are forced to leave their houses for any reason currently stands to 10 crore as per the UN data. And this is something which is quite a substantial population. Many of the countries do not have this much of population. Nordic countries की तो total population है 2.5 करोड़ है, 5 countries की बना तो the entire focus, the quantum of people who have been displaced, the forced to leave their houses is quite huge, quite big. Now, what are these sources of conflict? We can divide conflict into 4 types. The first one is the conflict which is inflicted upon you or is imposed upon you. Okay. What is the kind of conflict that is imposed upon you? War on terror. Afghanistan faced war on terror is a conflict which is imposed upon you, which is inflicted upon you. And then you are forced to live in a conflict or a war-like situation. The second conflict is the inherited conflict. That is there a legacy that we inherit. Like property कभी-कभी ज़्यादा पता नहीं जाता, but अगर जो बटी नहीं होती है, that's an inherited conflict or a issue of contestation. And what are inherited conflicts? Conflicts within countries, like caste conflict. Inherited चला ही आ रहा है. Even till date, there is a conflict in the name of any one community against any other caste community. तो 5000 साल का खत्म हो जाता है. If there is between like this for 5000 years, so it's an inherited conflict. It's not imposed upon us. It's self-created conflict. The third one is the engineered conflict. बनाया जाता है, strategically designed conflict, which is war of ideology. Communist, leftist, rightist, capitalist, something which is the creation of the modern context of set of circumstances, designed conflicts, and then you become part of this community or that community. You belong to this, you belong to that. They can be just the walls that divide people, may not be violent in nature, but sometimes they can turn out to be violent in nature when you stand against protests, and these can be conflicts that are really dangerous sometimes. And the fourth type of conflict, I would say, is the conflict generated by non-state actors. Those who act undercover or underground because they are not happy with the system out there. They don't want to be part of either of the political system, economic system, social institutions, and then when they feel left out, they become guns. And the terror organizations and terror outfits are the non-state actors, which can want to guide the state actors, the legitimate actors. All right, such as in Afghanistan, they have come to the power only. Okay, in Pakistan, much of the influences of the non-state actors, so they come into power. And every actor will have, I have a tendency to go to every actor is then driven by their own influence, is influencing the politics. Regional politics, Maoist, national politics, the communal divide, international politics, the terror organization, or regional bi-country politics in terms of the non-state actors or terrorist organization being used as a proxy. अब इन सब में क्या होता है? People suffer, common people like me. We tend to suffer. And all the countries which are surrounding the European Union, West Asia, North Africa, and up until Pakistan here, even from Burma, people are fleeing the conflict zone. I mean, Paroma was telling me about Afghanistan. And I showed you certain pictures, sorry, just run a couple of pictures in the background from slide 1. And I'll show you some pictures which actually stir your soul. One को बड़ा पीड़ित करती हैं. People go on to start and then I'll just keep this when it comes this with me. So these are the people who are fleeing this conflict-ridden areas, and they want to find the chances of survival in the countries where they think that they will have life. Like liberty, individualism, freedom, and equality. So they want to go and live a life in these countries. Now look at this boat. You can keep on moving on the pictures here. Now these are overcrowded boats. Just stop here for a while. These are overcrowded boats that carry people from these regions to European countries. Now Europe में क्या होता है when you start? There is a deal that these traffickers strike with people who want to go. Syria में particularly 2015 के आसपास the refugee crisis was on its peak, and people used to shell out a large amount of money in order to reach the shores. Money कितना? Rough guess, 1200 euro से 1500 या 1800 euro. That depends upon the surety that will you reach alive or not. If it's a dinghy boat, particularly under rubberized boats, that boat can carry only a weight of 20 people maximum, but then 50 and 100 are also wide in that boat. This is one of that kind of boat which gets capsized. And the previous picture, if you can recall, was steel or plastic boat, but then that is overcrowded. As of the colonization, the slaves को भी नहीं ले जाते थे जब होता था. If you look at those pictures. But these are the boats in which you strike a deal for your life, paying 1200 to 1800 euros to have this arduous journey. In India, it's more than that. 1200 euro, somewhere maybe 1.5, 1.5 lakh. Around that. Something like that for journey where even you are not sure that if it capsizes like this, you will be alive or not. Now in this picture, next picture you show this. They are pulling it out. Now, in these pictures, what you see mostly men. Men are paying. Couple of women faces you will find, or one or two child you may see. Now, if the boat capsizes 1.5 kilometers from the seashore, how many of even men know swimming? And even if they know swimming, how many of them can swim in the sea 1.5 kilometers? And even if they swim, how many of them can swim with a backpack? जिसमें उनके documents छोटा मोटा कुछ सामान होगा. And think about the aged people, differently aged children and women. Something we need to think about. All the time we think about able-bodied men who swim up to 1.5 kilometers. And I think even how many of you know swimming here? If you go 1.5 kilometers, just imagine you also swimming in the sometimes even in the deep end of the pool. 5-star के pool में जहाँ 5 lifeguard बैठे वहाँ पे भी आपको 12 feet जाने में डर लगता है. So what to talk about 1.5 kilometers in the sea? Next, yes. These are, if somehow you are lucky enough to reach, you would be given these plastic sheets which are golden or black in color. आगे चलो. These are stop here. And that was a picture where they had put during the and I'll come on to that. एक blade वाला razor blade वाला wire होता है, so that you cannot go inside, you cannot see inside. And in this picture, the next one where you had seen a child, this man is crying because the baby is not alive. By the color of the foot, you can see it's blue. The baby is no longer alive, and he is swimming with the body. And if we move next, Nasim, these are dead or again, yes. This is how then people are trafficked. Their things are abandoned. These are life jackets. Those who come, they come, they survive, and then they just mix up somewhere. Here. Now, during 2015, Dublin Convention had put a strain on the European Union. I told you the soul of the European Union was what? Freedom of movement, no borders. You don't need to carry any paper. You can move from one country to another. This is an installation. Installation है जितने जैसे आर्ट इंस्टॉलेशन होते हैं ना आर्टिस्ट बनाते हैं तो उन्होंने सबकी जैकेट्स इकट्ठे करके इंस्टॉलेशन बनाया है वैसे मूव आगे ओके स्टॉप so you come and you get somewhere just diffuse yourself in the surrounding. Now what happened during 2015 when the crisis was at peak? Usually Dublin Convention necessitates when you apply for visa जब आपको बाहर जाओगे you apply for visa in European countries in EU Schengen visa, there are certain requirements which need to be fulfilled. And this is where we follow migrant refugee और asylum seeker में क्या अंतर होता है. Suppose मैं refugee हूँ मैं किसी तरह भाग के बच गया, alright? Now when I reach the first country, वहाँ पे आपका enrollment होता है as per the norms of the Dublin Convention. And उसमें दो तीन चीजें होती हैं. You have to produce your valid documents, passport or any form of identity that are given to this way. Then your fingerprinting is done and a form is filled and you seek for asylum. यहाँ पे आप asylum seeker हो जाते हो the moment you fulfill the necessity of these official papers and then you wait for your asylum application to get clear कि आपको refugee status देना चाहिए कि नहीं. अब उसमें कितना टाइम लगता है 8 से 9 महीने because you just have to send your papers back, verify that this person actually has a genuine fear. Otherwise, anybody can go and say, "Well, to the fear and I can take a refugee status." No. So you do some paperwork. You seek an asylum. Your asylum application may get accepted. You get status, or may get rejected. Then you have to be deported back. When this is no founded fear, and this is a misreporting of the fact. And then you do these things. During 2015-16, crisis क्या हुआ इतना peak पे हो गया कि the person who was managing this form filling, fingerprinting, all these things, it was not easy for an ordinary office to manage such a number. Suppose you usually estimate लगाते हो. Usually you take 10 minutes to clear one individual, 10 में बहुत conservative बता रहे हो. इससे ज़्यादा ही लगता है because you are speaking to somebody who may not be well conversant in your language. The person may not know English. Then you fill the form. Already I'm terrified if you're full half confident, you know. So imagine the kind of psychological trauma an individual is in after this kind of journey. You do not know what kind of reception you will have after your form. And then you are doing your fingerprinting, all these things. Every system is liable to getting collapsed. If you हमारे यहाँ नहीं जाती वहाँ पे भी जाती है. And all these things systems do fail. At that point of time, when on an average, an individual can manage 3 to 4 individuals in 1 hour, and you had an MD of 100 of people, 4 or 5 officers will take care of a rush of 500 people throughout the day. But when it comes to thousands, what do? You just open the gate. So, you sometimes observe some toll gates. The toll the light was done to 8 minutes before, and you feel lucky to check movie निकाल. You don't have to pay 50 or 60 rupees and then you can lucky pull that or the एकदम से लगा. This was like a toll gate thing. This is okay, you come to Italy, but have a safe passage. Where do you want to go? You want to go to Germany, do everything there in Germany. And the Dublin Convention, all the routine procedures came to a standing down. And then they said, they must not get lost in other countries where the other Central and Eastern European countries, and they started erecting borders. So there's four European Union which were borderless travel on this world. There were punchers, cheerleaders in this horrifying. Because they said that you have to take certain amount of people. Union when the crisis comes, they will be how to manage what we do. So the union decided that we have quota of people who are coming to us. Quota कैसे decide होता है कि how many people will Germany to say will take 100, how many will X country take, Y country take, Z country take. It's not a couple of things which are roughly seen as the population of the country, their economic development, already existing number of people there, okay, and their absorption capacity in terms of GDP and other items. Now, the issue started that the Eastern European countries, they said that all this mess in these countries, in these regions, is being created by the Western country. Why would we take something which is a follow-up of your action? तुम्हारी गलती का अजाना हमने बना. You created all these problems in this one region, West Africa, West Asia, and North Africa, and now you want us to be able to be able to. And then they said, no, we are not going to take it. They said, no. One country, Poland, which Paroma talked about, they had a quota of how many people? Imagine. Itna quota of refugees. 5,000. And they said, we want Catholic, Christian, white. Selected. We give Indian to these people. Estonia is a very small country. Imagine quota of how many people? Also. And there was a cry, there was resistance, I can't take 200, these many people. These were the issues on which there was a clash. And we are not going to take them. Because Polish example tells you that you are culturally other. Now let me come to the second part of my talk, and then we will take the third turn. The issues of culture are very important. No matter I go voluntarily to work, or I go forcefully to save my life. Initially, I go as an economically dependent migrant or a refugee saving for life, or as a diaspora, even as a citizen, I settled somewhere. But my settlement has got three types of consequences. Short term is let me go for 2 minutes there and then I come back. My journey to this world has three period consequences, right? Short term, mid term, and long term. I go with my economic baggage. That's not a huge journey. But over time, in the medium to long run, I unfold my cultural baggage. Am I right? तो मैं आपको तीनों में से एग्जांपल देती हूँ, रिफ्यूजी का भी, माइग्रेंट का भी और डायस्पोरा का भी. तो वो as economically dependent and diaspora का सबसे पहले बता दूँ आपको. That's very interesting to decipher also. If I look at Indian diaspora, what is the percentage of Indian diaspora in Europe? बहुत ज़्यादा नहीं है, continental Europe में. UK is one of the countries which has large number of Indian diaspora, and roughly there are 30 lakh people of South Asian origin. I'm saying South Asia, which includes India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. नेपाल से बहुत थोड़े, बांग्लादेश से 5 लाख, पाकिस्तान और इंडिया के तकरीबन बराबर. And Indians को देखा जाए तो almost 20 to 2.2 million, 20 से 22 लाख Indians हैं. इसमें कुछ diaspora वाले हैं और बाकी जो है वो new migration students in all these countries हैं. Now, the first generation of diaspora which went from South Asia to India, Manasi, just before the partition or after the partition of India, they went as the workers, the subservient, the construction of Europe, market and the reconstruction job में पैसा US लगा रहा था, but ये countries को दोबारा बनाना. So Indians, South Asians went as the first generation. Our first generation का characteristic क्या था? They were subservient. They were not well versed in English. They belonged to certain regional areas where they were from agricultural families. So if they went as workers and also professional strength, but so when these guys went, the first generation of diaspora was very law-abiding because I do not have a bargaining power. I'm fearful of law. West, Central Asia, East or West. And if you can recall, you are very young generation, very present generation. But other you can sometimes go back to some of the movies, days for days. They are portrayed as black or white lines in East or West. Naya Gaur and all these things. These were movies, days for days. They were shown as the West है बहुत different है. और इसीलिए हम तीन चीजें देखें वेस्ट के बारे में, यूरोप के बारे में, that West is difficult, distant and different. तीन भी निकल के आते हैं हमारे difficult to engage, distant, mentally और idealistic and different. ये हमसे बहुत अलग है, उनकी operating mechanism से बहुत अलग है, template बहुत अलग है. When you land there, you automatically दुनिया में आ गए. And of course now we are in a globalizing world, we have so many images to see. But still, you find it very different in terms of how these guys manage. So there is a lot of difference in the way the first generation of diaspora connected to this. The second generation which got born there and studied there, they were very conversant with English. They knew ways of life. So they got going to make a belong. So because Smith was being trained from names like Raghav, Ram, Lakshmi, they have much more Indian names than we have. And I tell you about, if you do a name study, in Mauritius, there was a very famous person whose name was Dukiram. बहुत आज के बच्चों ने दुखीराम नाम रखे हैं उसको. Tina, Ara, Shara, the most modern names that we have, and they are very traditional names. Raghupati, Lakshmi, Devki, they are much more close because they have carried their culture at that point of time. They do not know how much water has gone under the waves in India also. So they are rooted, they are fixated there at that point of time. So these people, the second generation is now Raghupati has studied with Smith, with Kim, with Bill, with Stephen, and they are well versed, they are converted in that accent also. They don't even themselves to listen. And they say, Akshay of Maharaj. Now comes the third generation, which is much more generation of war. And you on Instagram have access to everything because Z shows all sub-global channels everywhere in the world. So French maybe साथ भी कभी बहुती आ रहे हैं तो they all talk in French. Subtitles and all things. So they know everything in their language also, in this language also, and they enjoy also. And then they say, where am I from? And then there is a reverse swing. Then वापस बात की चेष्टा होती है. So then the diaspora has different ways, generations they connect and disconnect with the home and the host country in different forms. So वो matrix बनता है interesting था. Migrant to जाते ही purposefully क्या है मतलब 5-year visa, 3-year visa or another student visa or for a short term employment. हाँ these are there कि एक employment खत्म हो जाती है तो then you take the another one. Scholarship खत्म हो गई तो आप दूसरी ले लेते हो. But here, because you are not here, there is no element of permanency is not there. So you tend to remain what you are at the same time learn the school from where you are going. And refugee which are ahead refugee. And if I have some more pictures, there are some pictures of refugee camps here. Just show these are all data I can but this is back. बस पीछे था और पीछे this is a refugee camp. the state of affairs in which people are living as they we have time of classifications. And winters are very terrible. This year, even summer is terrible. 47 in Portugal. You can't imagine. 47 degree. 40 in UP, and they have declared an emergency. And all the rivers are dried up. And there never been more fans other than air conditioning in winters. So this time they are realizing what the other part of the world faces the temperature and the heat. So this is the next picture. Not backwards, forward. This is an area you camp. This is in Jordan. So the UN camp in Jordan. Jordan is next to Syria. वहाँ पे तकरीबन 40 लाख 40 से 45 लाख लोग जो है जॉर्डन में इन कैंप्स में रहते हैं. And these are some of the pictures to see how people are trying to put themselves inside. It is a great water sphere, and these are how people are trying to put themselves inside. They are lying here. Instead, people are trying to play. Next, these are when the borders were erected, and they said, please walk to the Nordic countries, to Germany. So they started walking like this on the highways. And if I can move on to next, yes, this is how people inside the countries they travel. ये क्या है? Cold storage truck है. And इसमें घुसा के migrants को छुपा के लेके जाते हैं. Truck they are having a lot of gay time doing all these things. And then what they do? The trucks, the frozen trucks, the sabji ke bags ke beech mein they just put you in. And the police has new ways of identifying it. They take seers. और उसमें randomly मार देते हैं. In case somebody is hidden, so you will get stuck. These are very inhuman aspects of it. Coming on to the last part of it, then how this is producing the issues of cultural clashes. Because I'm dealing with the other, there are various ways in which I deal with the other. And now, when I say me, I'm imagining myself to be in group. And anybody other than me, culturally other, linguistically other, religiously other, socially different, regionally different, nationally different, anyway, racially different, is seen as the outgroup. In-group versus the outgroup. And how do in-group and outgroup relate to one another? They relate to one another in 5 ways. The first one is a very pathetic state of affairs which is happening to many of the refugees at this point of time also, and all of us travel. The first one, the outgroup is seen as an enemy, an anomaly. And this enemy or anomaly must be annihilated from the surface of the government. So, Holocaust, where you are killing people, actual things, in the name of, and this is happening in many of the regions in the world. The second one, the way in which in-group and out-group relate to one another is absolute distanciation. Okay? I am okay with your existence. पहले मेरा existence ही नहीं चाहिए मुझे. I am okay with your existence to be there, but there will be absolutely no interaction between these two groups. And communities and sub-communities practice this kind of interaction between in-group and out-group. It can be between Shia and Sunni, sometimes Protestant and Catholic, sometimes ethnic differences within community or caste. Whatever, that there is no communication between in-group and out-group. The third one is that there is a hierarchy. You are there, but I am superior to you. My language, my culture, my habit, my religion, my practices are better than yours. These second are combination. Because in the modern times, you just cannot do away with just shutting yourself until it boils down to half. There are communications, there are arenas in which you can or possibly interact with one another. So interaction to hoga, but I am superior than. So you must understand that we are hierarchically superior. And this is a kind of race in which we are all engaging. My boga is better, my caste is better, my religion is better, my language, my food. The fourth way of in-group and out-group, how they relate to one another is seen the other group as potential converts. Because in order to have your dominance and superiority, you need to have numerical preponderance. मेरे पीछे जितने ज़्यादा लोग पड़े होंगे उतना ही मैं strong रहूँगा. So all you guys, you come to my fold. I'll embrace you in this particular religion, community, caste, whatever, and this will give me strength. And I see you as potential convert. I incentivize you to come and join. Okay. And the last one is the ideal one, which talks of life, giving you freedom, identical situation in which an individual gets an opportunity to realize his full potential when everybody lives harmoniously with each other. So this kind of condition, or these 5 conditions, have 3 ways of relating to one another. Is it integration? Is it assimilation? Or is it ghettoization? Integration, you come to France and remain whatever, but the model remains that you are separate, I am multicultural society, like we are equidistant. The government is equidistant, like we are a multicultural society, diversity is there. You come here, be like yours. Number 2, assimilation. Come here and become like us. Assimilate kar lo apna. You speak French, you speak German, assimilate the model of integration. And the third one is ghettoization. Come here, be like yourself, but remain this one. So, this is the third way in which certain practices in Europe, multicultural, intercultural, or ghettoization, are being reflected in the policy and practices. So, finally, what is the state of affairs now? Europe had a very interesting journey. To sum up what I said in the last 50 minutes, Europe had a very interesting journey up until modernization. Modernity had both goods and bads. This is all about achieving hierarchy. So advantages distributed all over the world. We took some of them good, some of them we could not imbibe in the true sense. So it is a coin to both the sides. Europe itself had a very bitter past, but came to a kind of union, which is a very good peace project in the integration where they have been able to overcome a lot of problems. But its own journey of European Union is something which is not very smooth. It's full of crises. You can maybe work with them. But the beauty of the union is it's quite resilient. And in this journey, Europe is facing a lot many problems which are related to culture. Culture, अपने जो issues है वो ही नहीं बाद में refugees और other countries में जो cultural issues हैं वो आ रहे हैं. So how do we manage those compounded issues? अपने जो है because there is no European identity, there is no European culture as such, but modern cultural aspects are there. So how do we take care of all these problems which are ever increasing or increasing in complexity with every passing day? This is what Europe is facing now. The institutions and the mechanisms are such that they have been able to overcome all these problems. Because when we are in foresight there to see, assess, and spend on it, it's quite good, quite important. The societies are mature. They are taking the decisions, although they are decided about decisions are going to be like but yes, collectively, it is emerging as one of the finest examples of regional integration and the successful peace project, which people wanted to replicate in other parts of the world, but the world was so successful. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for such an important lecture. Thank you. And maybe this session, a wonderful general session on the topic of race improvement. I think all of us have learned a lot from the lecture. The way you have given us input on refugee crisis in Europe, taking us through the situations and context in which this Thank you so much for enlightening us. Now, I would like to open the floor for discussion. Any questions, if you have any queries, please put up. I would also like to mention here that our online, for our online participants, you can also put up your queries on the chat section. We will take it up from there and we'll pose it to our speaker respectively. Okay, so
one by one, or whatever, your choice.
Good afternoon, ma'am. This part of politics. My question is that the political were really hard to achieve, but now doesn't a country run by the balance of its values and interests? If you only look at the humanitarian aspect, will not it be injustice for the people already residing in that state? That already have starved amount of resources.
Very right. You want me to comment on this or tell my opinion on this?
Your opinion.
My opinion. Yes, you are very right. How much can you do? Say, for example, it's a very general thing that you learn in engineering also. There's a chair. How much weight it can be on? All right. You cannot have very light usage of this chair, which is underutilization of your resources. All right. Nor you can put tons on it because that will crush the system. Altogether, what common city? How much weight, how much can you put on this? So if this is your society, its capacity to hold and sustain, you need to see. ये यूरोप में जो कोटा सिस्टम बनाया ना वो उन्होंने यही रैशनल कैलकुलेशंस करके बनाया कि इनके पास पहले कितने हैं, इनका डेवलपमेंट स्टैंडर्ड कितना है, कितना वो ये ले सकते हैं. So these are rough models that are calculated on the basis of which you define the quota system. And yes, beyond a limit, it is not possible for any society when it comes to disturbing your. देखो बेटा 3 terms में होता है impact. एक तो short term होता है. Short term क्या impact है? You come, एक भीड़ आ गई आपके पास, 100 people have come. तो आपको settle करना है सबसे पहले. Their sanitation, their blankets, their food, their water, sleep beds and all these things you have to arrange short term हो गया. अब 2-3 दिन खा पी लिए, सो लिया, next what? You cannot make them dependent upon the system. You will integrate them. Now integrate them to find a kind of engagement for them, economic engagement, fix them in certain jobs or something that can be taken care of. Even these guys can be utilized in terms of cleaning the refugee camp only or maintaining the borders and all these things. Up now, this is medium term or larger than the short term, but then lesser than the medium term. Medium term looks for a kind of employment, say in hospitality sector or something else. No, long term, when they start saying no, you want to do something here, and these cultural clashes will continue to exist because first you come as a dependent, and then you start fixing your masses. And how much do you do that? That I want my own language schools, I want my own prayer places and all these things. Then it becomes a question of compensation. And this is where the fine balancing act has to be done by the government and the communities. So, absolutely right. Up to what you can bear the burden is a rational calculation taken up by the board, by the host. Yes.
From BA Political Science, I'll ask you one question from Sheetal ma'am. That is, if you are saying about refugees, then can you say that the people of Europe are rooted from ancient times? They're not migrated or they're not in some other countries situated there until now running their lifestyle in Europe. Are they actually rooted from ancient times or they are only refugees who are situated there?
What do you want to see? Like diaspora, the community has been there for a long time.
Yes.
Yes. A lot of migration has happened continentally also. But migration in the modern sense is noted only 400, 500 years back. And
I would also say that are all Europeans staying in Europe from the very beginning?
Europeans themselves are migrants.
Yes, ma'am.
ये तो बहुत historical ancient में चले जाएंगे हम लोग. वैसे तो अगर आप देखो तो जब होमो सेपियंस ही आए तो अफ्रीका से कहाँ का you see these maps in which there are arrows that show कि यहाँ से up extreme to Russia and then वहाँ से अलास्का के जो small gap है आपका वहाँ से जाके फिर अमेरिकाज में गई है ह्यूमैनिटी. ये तो बात अलग है. If we talk about migration from Asia, one community in Europe is called as the Roma community. And Romas are considered to be the gypsy community which has traveled from India some 2,500 years ago. और उनका कल्चर, उनकी बातें, उनके काफी सारे शब्द जो हैं, the words that they use and the practices that they have, they are reflecting Indian culture, Hindu culture, मैं अगर इसको specifically कहूँ. So these communities are there, but this kind of migration which happened thousands of years ago, there are records and historical limited proofs of that these people traveled and migrated because they became like them only. The modern migration is easy to track because you have valid papers on the basis of which you travel, and otherwise also ethnically and otherwise also you are identified. So if we talk about that, how many say diaspora is settled for a long period of time, and some of the diaspora in Europe, particularly I think the example of Netherlands. Netherlands में there is a community which is called as Hindustani. Hindustani कौन है? जो सूरीनाम से, इंडिया से पहले सूरीनाम गए लैटिन अमेरिका में, और वहां से जब सूरीनाम आजाद हुआ उसके बाद आके नीदरलैंड्स में बसे. ट्वाइस माइग्रेंट्स हैं, तो वो लोग हैं तो इंडियंस, बट दे आइडेंटिफाई देमसेल्व्स एज सूरीनामी हिंदुस्तानीज कहते हैं. सो दीज आर द पीपल दोज हु आर कॉमन बिटवीन नेटिव आइडेंटिटी ऑफ बीइंग एन इंडियन और द मॉडर्न आइडेंटिटी ऑफ बीइंग अ सूरीनामी. 5 जनरेशन से पहले हिंदुस्तान में, फिर सूरीनामी हो गए, अब नीदरलैंड में चले गए. So the identities have different levels. At what time, what identity operates? This is very important. So one individual whom I know from this community is, उनका नाम है राजकुमार जगबंधन. अब नाम तो हिंदुस्तानी के राजकुमार जगबंधन. उनसे पूछो कि आप कौन हो, तो मैं नीदरलैंड से डच हूँ. और आपके एंसेस्ट्री क्या है? सूरीनाम से है. So this is very interesting cases that they perform pujas also. They give respect to their Suriname values also, and then to the modern European values. और यहाँ पे भी सिर्फ नीदरलैंड्स में नहीं है, यहाँ पे भी ये यूरोपियन हो चुके हैं. तो identities are very interesting. They play a lot of role in defining complexity of your character. And the more you are open to many identities, the smoother is your transition in this world. The more rigid and mono-dimensional, monochromic you are, colored you are, the difficult it is for you to mix in the other parts of the world. That's the sociology side of it.
So, ma'am, I have a little query. About the strategic crisis and all, I would like you to please give us some insight on the gender aspect there. What are the problems and challenges that women will face while they, they go and cross those barriers? And so, what are the challenges they actually face in terms of that? You said even recognizing them for refugee status takes long, for 8-9 months. So suppose somebody facing gender violence and sexual abuse, and that's how these women are being migrating from their own land. So in that case, recognizing on that ground also is a bit difficult situation. So how do you look at this problem? How do they manage giving us refugee status to a woman who is urgent to be declared as given this shelter?
The gender aspect of this situation makes the problem even worse. Because number one, while being trafficked, the certain conditions and situations of women are not taken into account. Okay. As you have seen in the pictures, how many women can you locate in this crowd that is walking? Very few. Number two, most of these countries from which these refugees have gone are highly patriarchal and conservative society. And the free movement of women in these groups is itself a challenge. Okay, when there are what to talk about during the crisis-like situation, It's a factory, assembly line. And 50 men are working and you ask one woman to go and work in the middle of these 50 men. It may be highly equal society. Theoretically, practically also, it creates some kind of uneasiness. Not for any other reason, but just being numerically overpowered by the other. The third is that gender itself raises a lot of issues. I'll give you an instance of a serious family which I read from a blog. This lady was traveling with two kids, less than the age of 8 and below 8, and one brother-in-law. So lady traveling with two kids and one brother-in-law, 4 in all. And what happened? She somehow reached the border. And when she reached the border, she had to go to Berlin because their final destination was Berlin. He dropped her after since the bargain. So when she said that she struck a deal with somebody saying that 560 euros you will pay for this journey on road up until Berlin. So he said, okay, we have a American car with number of people can be packed inside more than the number. वहाँ पे जितनी seats हैं उतने passenger बैठेंगे. So this was a 4-seater car in which, 5-seater car in which driver have occupied one seat and rest of the folks were stuck again 560 something euros to be mentioned. So what happened the moment she handed over the money, somebody came and sat in the front seat, another man, middle ages, whom they could not say कि oh yeah हमने पैसा दे दिया. Now there were 3 seats left. What is she going to do? She sat with her 2 kids. Okay. So then she thought to their brother-in-law who they for 20 years, he would, and if the driver said, oh, he'll follow another car is coming, so he'll follow us and then you will be together and we'll have a journey, rest of the miles together. She, in all her innocence, believed, she sat and this guy started. After 10-15 kilometers, he stopped in the middle of the road, three of them out. And she does not know where his brother-in-law, because that was the only male figure who was traveling, who was able to handle such crisis situation with 2 kids. And she was desolate. She was lying, sitting in the middle of the forest, and then the petrol police found her. They took her to Berlin. And no idea about the brother-in-law. She said after 1 month, I got reunited with him in one of the refugee camps in Berlin. And so for the month, she was not just going, is he alive? Is he there? Where is he? Where is he? For women particularly, these kind of issues create a lot of trauma, not just for women, even for children, even for an aged man. I would say nobody is so mature enough to think everything that it's not a kind of situation that actually, I'm so sorry to use this word. And women can have other issues which are related to their health, their hygiene, their vulnerability, their privacy, their isolation, and then their safety. And yesterday only there was a very tragic event of some guy molesting another refugee on the streets. Somebody videographed it and then posted it on internet. The aspiring candidate in Italy for next election, she further reposted it, and then there was the inward cry that how can you post something like this on these things, because it's on recording. So that is why I'm being very, very cautious about using the appropriate set of words that I'm using here. So these things are, they are mental, physical, psychological, physiological. What sort of things are there? Let alone the issue of being. First of all, the percentage of women is few, children even lesser, and among their vulnerability is highest among all substance because they are the easy targets, they are the easy prey. For the traffickers also, for the people who can actually please them. So this is where, like, even if the boat is 100 meters away from 100 meters is pretty long distance to walk from. So how much can you survive? How much of it can you actually take? It's something which is actually, that is why most of the men from these countries, they go, they apply for a status, and then after 1 or 2 years, they think that they will bring their families back. By the time, I don't know how these families back home survive, how do they take care of their even if they get their status, after that,
how difficult it is to get their documentation done in terms of suppose they have to stay there. So housing, applying for a house, so is that also is a complex situation because anyway they're treated as others and then anyway this animosity coming. So how that situation takes place?
Different countries have their different ways of dealing with, say, medical assistance to these people, or even giving them some money to survive for a week or something like that. For instance, France offers somewhere in the range of 30 to 40, 38 to 40 euros per week per individual to maintain this maintenance money that you will get. Nordic and Sweden countries are much more open because their populations are less and then they have better infrastructure and systems to take care of. So they offer somewhere 36, 37 euros per week. And then there are temporary arrangements like in Germany, the schools and hospitals, they were converted into refugee shelters, which were solid constructions other than the tents and camps which are there. Then there were some abandoned buildings, sometimes you have in some villages, so you house them here. But the entire process of documentation takes a long time. Otherwise, your life remains very vulnerable until unless you get a refugee status, which is granted by the host country and which actually takes some time. And going back, sending your paper back, even in war on Syria, if you remember some of the images from Syria, the drone was taking images of completely cities are reduced to rubble. So what do you expect from their coming as a response? Because there's no postal service or no communication happening. So in some cases, in such cases, it is totally dependent on the ones who reach that shore, things will be taken care of. So those are the big giant leaps of faith that you take without knowing that what will be the future most of the time.
Okay, I have another question.
Hello, ma'am. I have a comment as well as I don't know if there is a question, but I will still say. I use this, historically, this is the refugee crisis worldwide is increased. Whether we see the Middle East, whether we see the south of Mediterranean Sea, the north, especially in Europe, as well as in the Asian region. If we see this refugee crisis on Indians and all of this policy, we can look at, I think that most of them have their genesis because of the independence of the West. Most of the time, at least either it is the Western European nations, they have very foreign direct independence or US mind. So obviously, there is a limit for the country to and give access to refugee. But why is there not UN or is there any approach or policy for the EU or UN? Obviously, UN also has some whether they can create a space to make their own place safe, like where from they are coming. Why not create their safe place, like settling them back to their own place, making that more viable or less vulnerable and that kind of situation, instead of making them, assimilate or integrate or.
Pratyush, your question is very right. Prevention is better than the cure. But these mechanisms are all curative in nature. UN is helping by sending peacekeeping forces. UN is establishing, but UN is not arresting where no good cause. That's what is, sometimes a demand or a cry from people. Now in this scenario, there is no easy answer to this because even in small groups, the diversity of interest and the vested interest of diverse players, understand it in both the sense, is so complex that they pull strings in opposite directions. Okay. And rarely even the internal conflicts are fought very peacefully. These days they escalate very quickly into violent ones where you start breaking and taking law in your own hand, say murders, violence, and this and that. And such kind of situation, mostly certain sections with their pure interests are vested. They are the operators, they are the players in that. But rest of the population gets hurt in the whirlwind that comes in. In that case scenario, people tend to escape somewhere. Now, UN is an organization, or even for that matter, any other international organization. They are there to maintain the peace. Okay. But unless until you invite them to maintain peace, it has a limitation of entering and interfering your situation. Say, for example, even India, why will we invite a third party? We think that our mechanisms, our institution, my polity, my government is good enough to handle my situation because it's my own internal law and order situation. Unless until we want a third party to come. So that is why UN is not an enforcement agency. It is a kind of an agency, ideally, typically setting up the world order or peace. And unless until it's a ratification by the members of the UN that, okay, we send a peacekeeping force to Afghanistan or to Somalia and things like that, they do not even send. Unilaterally decisions nahi hote UN maybe unless until it's US in one of the cases of war on terror in Afghanistan. So these are the agencies which step in only with the consent of the regional organization parties which are involved in it. And then what maximum do? They are like a service provider in the field of crisis or in the eventuality of crisis. But to say that can they be instrumental in bringing peace back to this, that is very difficult. Because first of all, the situation aati jab hai, then when it is out of your hands, say for example, Syria, one player wanting to dismantle the current regime, the other one is not successful, the third non-state actor jumps into the picture, which is worse than the first two. So when you have such diversity of players making a chaos of the situation, then it's very difficult for people to stand united because they then also start aligning themselves. You know, so this is why international interventions and reconciliation is a tough process. But it happens in few cases, which is also very wise. And so, but successful examples are not yet established. Yes, it's very difficult to send people back. Reverse migration बहुत मुश्किल है because by the time you are so used to this kind of life, the pattern, the place, even if it is full of hardship, that you do not want to go back. The percentage is too small.
Ma'am, there is one question from Dr. P. She's saying that is there any special provision for persons with disabilities? As in perhaps regarding this refugees and migration.
Online. Okay. Dr. Agarwal, yes, as I'm saying, you know, that Europeans are very sensitive to the kind of specific needs of different groups, communities, and there are special trainers and community workers, people, nurses, staff, which is trained into taking care of the special needs of these people under different frameworks which are operating within the individual member states. These are the competencies of member states and much more existing at the level of civil society and non-governmental organizations. So the refugee camps have different kind of setups. Yes, of course, yes, they are. But the issue is that, number one, the percentage of differently able people is less. Number two, even if they are there among migrants and refugees, there have been special provisions to take care of these people with special protective packages and everything. But then how far this becomes successful, because already you are in such a vulnerable situation compounded by your physical features. So it is a bit difficult to carry out that swiftly. But yes, the civil society is quite active and sensitive about people with disabilities.
Okay, thank you everyone for your wonderful questions, and thank you, ma'am, for giving those answers. Thank you everyone for patiently bearing with us all the time. We're going to wind up the session now. We will meet you shortly, not this week, maybe the coming week on Monday again. But before that, we have an announcement. Day after tomorrow, we are going to set MCQ-based questions for you. This is part of this orientation course. So all of you have to take the test. We will circulate online MCQ test for you. Like we have emails, so we'll send it through email. So please take the test. And apart from the MCQ test, you also have to write an assignment of 500 words of your chosen topic from this whatever discussions you are having. So you can also see the session details we are going to share. So you can write a short note of about 500 words as an assignment to fulfill the criteria for receiving the certificate for this orientation course. And that you have to submit by 31st of August. So these are the two criteria. At the 1st of September, sorry. So the for assignment, the date is 1st of September. By then you have to submit, and also by Sunday you have to take the MCQ test. There is a booklet already shared with all of you. Kindly go through that. And the questions will be very simple, so do not worry about it. But these are the criteria that is part of the leadership program. By saying that, thank you so much again for joining us on this 2 weeks certificate orientation program on FTP, Introducing European Studies, Concepts, Strengths and Opportunities. I would also like to thank you, ma'am, once again for everything that you have done for us. Couldn't be more grateful. Thank you so much, ma'am, for joining me. And thank you, Paroma, ma'am, also for your wonderful delivery. Thank you so much.